Mom, Eleonora and I have decided that you'll be living in the annex, not the main house, announced the son I raised on my own. I couldn't help but laugh. He had no idea who actually owned the house he was renting. It was a cold October evening. I sat by the window of my small house, looking through old photographs and sipping tea from my favorite porcelain cup, the one with a crack in it. A gift from James back in his school days. I am Victoria Carr, 58 years old, and today I feel every year, every wrinkle on my face as a story of loss and hope. 25 years ago, my husband Robert died of cancer. I remember that late-night phone call, the hospital corridor reeking of antiseptic, and the doctor with his eyes cast down. James was only 10, a boy with his father's eyes and smile, who couldn't understand why his mother was crying and why Dad wasn't coming home anymore. I look at a photo where Robert is holding little James on his shoulders. They're both laughing. It was our last family vacation. Who could have known? After the funeral, I had to face reality, bills, James's future education. In truth, we weren't in financial trouble. Robert had left us a substantial estate in a trust fund, including several properties. But before he died, he made me promise to raise James without a sense of entitlement, to teach him the value of work and help him become a decent man, not a spoiled heir. And I kept that promise. Our home was modest, I worked as a primary school teacher, and the trust fund remained our secret. In the evenings, I took a second job at a bookstore, and on weekends, I did custom sewing. James grew up never suspecting our real financial situation. I remember my first day juggling 3 jobs. Morning, teaching at school; evening, bookstore shift; night, sewing under the dim light of a desk lamp. James fell asleep while I was helping him with homework. I covered him with a blanket and kept working. By dawn, I realized I had dozed off right at the sewing machine, and so it went. Day after day, year after year. There wasn't even time to process my grief. Maybe that was for the best. To maintain the illusion of modest means, I had to live a double life. For the charitable work tied to managing the trust, I used my maiden name and carefully avoided publicity. I scheduled official meetings and charity events so they wouldn't intersect with James's social circle. My house is modest, but full of heart. A few of my early paintings still hang on the walls. I once dreamed of becoming a professional artist. In college, my professor told me I had talent, a true gift for seeing the world through color. After Robert's death, the brushes and paints sat gathering dust in the storage closet for years. I had neither the time nor the energy. The hardest decision of my life was selling Robert's mother's family heirlooms. A gold necklace with emeralds, passed down through generations, was meant to be James's future wedding gift to his wife. But when the letter came confirming his acceptance to the prestigious Newton College, I decided to honor my promise to Robert and not touch the trust. Selling the jewels was a way to preserve our legend while giving James the education he truly deserved. The jeweler examined the jewelry through a magnifying glass, clicking his tongue in admiration. "These stones are of excellent quality, madam. A family heirloom?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. The amount was substantial, but it barely covered the first year of tuition and housing. The rest had to be scraped together through loans and extra work. Each semester was a struggle, but I saw my son flourish in that environment. His first academic publication hangs on my wall beside his diploma. "Mom, I want to introduce you to someone special." James's voice over the phone was filled with excitement. That was a year ago. My son, already a successful IT specialist at a major company, rarely showed that kind of emotion. They arrived on a Saturday. I baked his favorite apple pie, wore my best dress, simple but elegant. I wanted to make a good impression. Eleonora was stunning, a slender blonde with perfect posture and a charming smile. An expensive pearl necklace highlighted the elegance of her neck. Her graceful demeanor spoke of good upbringing and education. "It's such a pleasure to meet you, Victoria. James has told me so much about you." Her voice was melodic, with a hint of a French accent. I hugged her, catching the delicate scent of fine perfume. "Welcome, dear. I'm so glad to finally meet the woman who won my son's heart." At lunch, Eleonora was delightful, talking about her work at a contemporary art gallery, her travels across Europe. James looked at her with eyes full of love. I hadn't seen him this happy in years, but then I noticed it. When she thought no one was looking, Eleonora's gaze swept over my home with quiet appraisal. She paused at the worn-out sofa, curled her lips slightly at the sight of the old television. For a brief second, the perfect partner mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. It was so fleeting, I wondered. Had I imagined it? Later, while helping me in the kitchen, she picked up a porcelain ballerina figurine, another gift from James. What a lovely little piece. Antique? No, just a souvenir, but it's dear to me. I see. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. At home, I only keep original artworks. My father always said, "Surround yourself with beauty, and life becomes more beautiful." There was no direct insult in those words, but I felt the sting. My house may be modest, but it's filled with real value. Love, memories, history. Couldn't James see the contrast between his upbringing and Eleonora's worldview? A week after their visit, I was sorting old magazines in the storage room. I was planning to recycle them. It was high time to clear the space. Among the stack of society publications Linda, my friend, had given me, I found a photo that made me freeze. On the social column page from 3 years ago was a photo from a charity gala. Eleonora, dressed in a sleek black gown, stood beside a gray-haired man in his 60s. His hand rested possessively on her waist. The caption read, "Businessman Daniel Higgins with his young wife at the annual Children's Dreams charity auction." I read the caption several times, unable to believe it. Wife? Eleonora had been married to that older man? Why hadn't she mentioned a previous marriage? Did James know? I cut out the photo and hid it in my desk drawer. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe there was an explanation. But the uneasy feeling took root deep inside. "Mom, we've decided to get married." James was beaming with happiness. We were sitting in my little living room drinking tea. "Eleonora is the one, you know. I've never felt anything like this before." I smiled, ignoring my unease. By then, Michael had already begun gathering information, but there was no solid evidence of danger yet. Who was I to stand between my son and his happiness, based only on suspicions? "That's wonderful news, sweetheart. I'm happy for you. There's one more thing." He looked away, and I knew this would be about money. Eleonora dreams of a real fairy tale wedding, with all the designer decorations, professional photographers, a reception at a beautiful venue. "Sounds expensive." I kept my voice neutral. "Very." He drummed his fingers nervously on the table. "We've already paid the deposit for the venue, but we still need more funds. I know you have savings." Savings. The money I had painstakingly set aside for 25 years, denying myself everything, officially. In reality, I could easily fund 10 such weddings from the trust, but that would shatter the entire illusion. "How much do you need?" He named the amount, and I deliberately feigned shock and hesitation, even though it was a trivial sum to me. "Mom, I know it's a lot to ask, but I promise I'll pay you back. It's just, with the mortgage and all the other expenses." "Of course, sweetheart." I took his hand, my calloused fingers on his smooth skin, a symbol of our supposedly different lives. "This is your special day. I want it to be perfect." The next day, I went to the bank and withdrew the money. The teller, who had known me for many years, raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Big purchase, Victoria?" "An investment in the future," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. If only she knew how literal those words were. The wedding was magnificent. Eleonora looked like a princess in a dress that cost more than my half-year salary. James, handsome and proud, introduced me to his new colleagues as my amazing mom who made all of this possible. After the wedding, my relationship with James began to change. He used to call every 2 or 3 days. Now it was once every 2 weeks, then once a month. Our Sunday lunches turned into rare formal visits, during which Eleonora would go on and on about her accomplishments at the gallery, her new connections in high society, and future plans. We're thinking of moving downtown. It's a prestigious neighborhood with the best schools." She gave James a meaningful glance. "Schools? Are you planning to have children?" I looked at my son hopefully. "Not anytime soon, Mom." He gave an awkward smile. "Eleonora wants to focus on her career first." "And buy a bigger house?" she added, scanning my living room. "No offense, Victoria, but I just don't understand how anyone can live in such confined space. It must feel so stifling." James cleared his throat. "Eleonora just means everyone has different preferences in living arrangements." "Of course, dear," I smiled. "This house was perfect for the two of us. It's full of happy memories." "Memories don't replace modern comforts," Eleonora muttered while checking her phone. With each visit, James spoke less and less, letting his wife lead the conversation. Sometimes I caught a fleeting glance from him, full of apology, but he'd quickly look away. My boy, once so open and affectionate, had grown distant in his wife's presence. Then the pandemic hit, suddenly and mercilessly. The gallery where I had officially worked for the past 5 years closed until further notice. I didn't show concern. The trust fund could have supported a life of luxury for several lifetimes. But to preserve our story, I had to play the part of a worried elderly woman facing financial difficulty. Summoning my courage, I called James. Not to ask for help. I would never do that, considering our real financial situation, but to see how much his attitude toward me had changed under Eleonora's influence. "James, darling, how are you? I'm so happy to hear your voice." "Hi, Mom. Sorry, I have a meeting in 5 minutes. Is it something urgent?" His tone was businesslike, distant. In the background, I could hear Eleonora's voice asking something. I lost my job. The gallery closed because of the pandemic." "I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sure you'll find something soon." "At my age, it's not so easy. I'm a bit worried." "Mom, I'm sorry. They're calling me. Eleonora's hosting an online dinner with some important people. I'll call you in a few days, okay? Hang in there." The call ended. I sat there holding the phone, feeling bitter. The test had been telling. James hadn't even offered to help despite all the years I'd cared for him. That promised call never came. 3 months passed. To keep up the act, I sold off a few small valuables, including my gold wedding ring, the last visible memory of Robert. I found a part-time job at the local supermarket, even though there was no financial need for it. One evening, the phone rang. James's name appeared on the screen, and my heart tightened with unease. His voice sounded weaker than before. "James, I'm so glad to hear from you." "Hi, Mom." His voice was oddly excited, but I heard a hint of fatigue only a mother would notice. "Eleonora and I have amazing news. We found the perfect house. 2 floors, a garden in a prestigious neighborhood." "That's wonderful, darling. I'm so happy for you." I tried to sound sincere, though a sense of dread was growing inside. Time was running out. "There's just one issue with the down payment. The bank is asking for more than we expected, and we thought, maybe you could help? It's a great investment. The value of the house will only increase." I paused, pretending to consider the request. "Mom, are you there?" "Yes, darling, I'm not sure I can help right now. After losing my job, I'm barely making ends meet." "But you must have something left? You've always been so frugal." There was a note of irritation in his voice, one I'd never heard before. My son, my James, was speaking to me like a bank clerk denying him a loan. "Let's meet and talk about it," I suggested, unwilling to continue the conversation over the phone. "Maybe you could come for dinner on Sunday." "Actually, we were thinking of meeting at a cafe downtown. There's a realtor nearby, so we could finalize things right after." A business-like approach, no sentiment. "All right, sweetheart, give me the address and I'll be there." The little cafe, ambiance, had been chosen by Eleonora. Of course, only trendy places for her. I arrived 10 minutes early, an old habit formed by years of caring for a little boy on my own. The waiter led me to a table by the window with a view of the park. Eleonora arrived precisely on time, impeccably dressed, her hair elegantly styled as if she'd just stepped out of a salon. Noticing me, she gave a polite smile, but there was no warmth in her eyes. "Victoria, you're early," she said instead of a greeting. "James is running late at work. He'll join us in about half an hour." I nodded, thinking maybe that was for the best. We could talk privately, and I'd have another chance to assess just how dangerous this woman might be for my son. "That's lovely, Eleonora. How have you been?" "Oh, we're just thrilled." She ordered a cappuccino with a wave of her hand, not even glancing at the waiter. "So much news, Victoria. James and I finally found our dream house." Her voice sounded like that of a child who had just gotten a long-awaited toy. She began describing the luxurious mansion in a prestigious neighborhood with such enthusiasm it seemed as if she already lived there. I knew the house in detail. It had been in our trust's portfolio for 15 years, and I had personally overseen its renovation. Can you imagine? 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, panoramic windows in the living room, looking out onto a private garden with a pool. Eleonora described every detail with growing excitement. "And the kitchen, Victoria, you should see the kitchen. Italian marble, built-in appliances, a central island. Not like your—" She stopped herself, catching my gaze, and quickly added, "I mean, a completely different style, of course." I smiled gently, used to her little barbs. "That sounds impressive, Eleonora. Must be very expensive." "It's an investment in our future," she waved it off. "James deserves the best. We both do." A young waiter approached to take our order. I noticed how Eleonora's expression changed. It became sultry, flirtatious. She leaned forward slightly, allowing him a better view of her blouse's neckline. That display of flirtation, with her husband on the way, was yet another glimpse of her true nature. Yet when James entered the cafe, I witnessed a remarkable transformation. The coquette vanished, replaced by a devoted wife. Eleonora straightened up, her gaze now full of genuine adoration. James looked tired, paler than usual. I watched him closely. Once, we had been so close, I knew every thought in his head, could read every emotion on his face. Now I saw a different man, impeccably dressed, in a suit I was sure Eleonora had chosen, reserved, as if afraid to say the wrong thing. Where had my open, sincere boy gone? The one who used to be passionate about architecture, just like his father? Robert would have been saddened to see our son abandon his childhood dream of changing the world with beautiful, functional buildings. At that moment, I made up my mind. It was time to save James, even if it meant revealing our family secret earlier than Robert had intended. "You know, Mom," James began, "that house has more space than we really need, just the two of us." Eleonora cut in. "James dreams of having a home office where he can work on his IT projects, and I need a walk-in closet," she laughed, as if it were a cute little whim. "And of course we'll have children. We have to think about the future." James nodded, but I saw his smile falter at the mention of children. Was that decision made without him too? I also noticed how her mention of kids contradicted what she had previously said about prioritizing her career. Eleonora was weaving her web methodically and deliberately. "Wonderful," I said, keeping the conversation going. "Have you already discussed the financial side?" An awkward pause followed. Eleonora gave James a look that clearly said, "Your turn." "Well, Mom," James cleared his throat, "that's actually what we wanted to talk about." I felt my heart tighten, not from fear over the money, but from realizing how far Eleonora was willing to go. "Of course, sweetheart, I'm listening." James avoided my eyes. "The bank approved the mortgage, but they're asking for a substantial down payment." 30%, Eleonora inserted. "Otherwise, the interest rate will be too high." "I see," I said, looking at my son, waiting for him to go on. "Mom, I know you sacrificed so much for me." His voice softened. "I'll never forget how you sold Grandma's jewelry to pay for my college." Eleonora tapped her nails impatiently on the table, clearly thinking these sentimentalities were a waste of time. Her urgency only confirmed that she cared about the money, not the emotional bond between us. "What are you getting at, James?" I gently nudged him. "Mom, I don't have enough savings for the down payment, and Eleonora suggested—" We thought. Eleonora decided to take the lead. Victoria, we know things have been tough since you lost your job at the gallery. And your house, well, it constantly needs repairs. It's a real money pit, she spoke quickly, as if reading from a rehearsed script. We'd like to suggest that you sell your house. The proceeds could go toward the down payment for our new home, and you would move in with us. We have a lovely annex with a separate entrance, so you'd be completely independent. It would be a win-win for everyone, she went on enthusiastically. You wouldn't have to worry about heating bills or fixing the roof, and we'd be nearby if you ever needed anything. James could take care of you, just like you took care of him all those years. James looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear. I could tell he was uncomfortable with the idea, but didn't have the strength to oppose his wife. His eyes looked dull, his skin had a sickly tone. The signs of slow poisoning were already visible. That's unexpected, I said at last, keeping my voice calm. I'll need time to think about it. Of course, Victoria, Eleonora gave a wide smile, clearly confident I'd agree. But don't take too long. Homes like that don't stay on the market for long. The rest of the lunch passed in tense silence. Eleonora chattered away about the details of their future luxurious life. James nodded silently, and I observed them both, a growing resolve building in my chest. It was time to act. Back home, I stood in the middle of the living room for a long time, looking around the room. This modest house, the one Eleonora so openly despised, had witnessed my entire life. It was where Robert and I began our family, where James was born, where I received the news of Robert's terminal diagnosis. It was where I'd spent sleepless nights maintaining the legend of our modest life while secretly managing a considerable estate through the trust fund. I walked over to the wall where the photographs hung. James at age 3 on his father's shoulders. James in his school uniform on his first day. James at his college graduation, happy, full of hope for the future. And Robert, my Robert, with his kind eyes and warm smile. What would you say if you saw what our boy has become? I whispered, touching the frame of his photo. I think it's time to tell the truth, earlier than you planned. Fatigue swept over me, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. I walked to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and retrieved the old wooden box from its hiding place behind the bookshelf. Inside were the most important documents, our marriage certificate, James's birth certificate, and a sealed envelope from Robert for James. I closed my eyes, letting the memories wash over me. I remembered that evening so clearly, as if it were yesterday. It was a rainy October night. James had just turned 5 and was already asleep upstairs, exhausted after his birthday. Robert sat across from me, pale and drawn. The diagnosis of late-stage cancer, received a week earlier, had left no hope. The illness was progressing quickly, and the doctors gave him no more than 6 months. Vika, we need to talk about the future. His voice was weak, but firm. About your future, and James's. Please don't, I squeezed his hand. You'll recover, and we'll be together. He shook his head. We both know that won't happen. Listen to me carefully. We don't have much time. Robert pulled out a folder of documents. This is the will. Everything is in your name. He flipped a page. But there's something else I never told you. I looked at him, confused. My family. You know, I had a complicated relationship with my father. He thought I was a failure for choosing a frivolous career in architecture instead of joining the family business. Robert smiled faintly. But before he died, he included me in the family trust. I never touched that money because I wanted to prove I could provide for my family myself. What are you talking about? I whispered. Vika, you'll never be in need. The trust manages several properties across the city. The income from them is more than enough for a comfortable life. I was stunned. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to live a normal life. And also, he looked toward the stairs, to James's room. I want our son to grow up without a sense of entitlement. I want him to understand the value of hard work and perseverance. Robert handed me an envelope. Here are the contact details for the trust manager, Michael. He's an old friend. You can trust him. Go to him when I'm gone. And James? When should I tell him? Robert thought for a moment. I'd prefer he finds out when he becomes a man, a real man, not just legally an adult. When he understands what truly matters in life, he squeezed my hand. Promise me, Vika. Promise you'll give him the chance to grow strong on his own. With tears in my eyes, I nodded. I promise, Robert, I promise. Robert lived for another 5 years, fighting his illness. He faded slowly, but used every day to be with us, to leave James with as many memories as possible. He passed away when James turned 10. I opened my eyes, returning to the present. Dawn was breaking outside the window. I had spent the entire night in the armchair, lost in memories. I set the envelope aside and looked at Robert's photo on the mantelpiece. All these years, I had faithfully kept the promise I made to my husband. To everyone around me, I was a school teacher, then an employee at the gallery, always an ordinary woman with modest means. At the same time, under my maiden name, I was actively involved in managing the trust fund, which included several properties and investments. To people in financial circles, I was a strict, competent heiress of considerable wealth. 2 lives, 2 identities, never intersecting. James grew up never knowing we were wealthy. He learned to value hard work, persistence, and compassion. He saw how carefully I saved every penny, and it taught him to handle money responsibly. But now it was time to act. I dialed Michael's number. Michael, we need to meet. Urgently. There was another reason I had maintained the illusion of modesty. The fear that any connection to Robert's wealthy family, who had never accepted me, would drag James into a world where status and wealth meant everything. Robert had deliberately walked away from that world, and I wanted to shield our son from it, especially during his formative years. Over the past 25 years, I had kept in touch with Michael Levinsky, though we had only met a few times, always for important legal matters regarding the trust. Most of the time, our communication was minimal. I trusted him with asset management, while I focused on everyday life. But now, it was time to ask for his help. The threat looming over James called for decisive action. Michael agreed to meet me the next day. His office was in an old Victorian house in the city center, understated elegance instead of flashy luxury, which had always appealed to my taste. The secretary led me into his office, where Michael, now graying and heavier but with the same sharp eyes, greeted me with a warm smile. "Victoria, it's good to see you," he said, motioning to the chair across from his desk. "From the sound of your voice on the phone, something's happened. Is James all right?" "James got married," I said as I sat down, placing my purse in my lap. "And I'm not sure he is." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Married? I didn't know." "There wasn't a big wedding? Eleonora preferred a small ceremony. I was only formally invited." "Eleonora?" Michael frowned, clearly trying to recall where he'd heard the name. "What's her full name?" "Eleonora Carr, née." "I don't know." "She hasn't shared much about her past," I said, pulling a cutout photo from my purse. "But I found out she used to be married to a businessman named Daniel Higgins." Michael took the photo and studied it carefully. His face visibly tensed. "Higgins." He stood up slowly. "I think I've heard that name in relation to a poisoning case, but I need to double-check a few things." I told him about how James had become distant after the wedding, about his change in behavior. I ended with their proposal to sell my house to fund the down payment on theirs. Michael listened with growing concern. "You think this Eleonora somehow found out about your trust?" he asked directly. "It's the only explanation," I nodded. "But how could she have? We've been so careful all these years." "I'll look into her employment history and connections," Michael said. "Law firms, investment companies. The financial world is small. If she was deliberately searching for information, she could have found a trace." "What should I do in the meantime?" "Absolutely do not agree to sell your home or transfer any funds," he said firmly, locking eyes with me. Don't sign a single document until we speak again. I'll make some inquiries and get back to you in a few days." I nodded. "Thank you, Michael. I feel like James is in danger. She's changed him, and not for the better." "Children grow up and make mistakes," Michael said philosophically. "The important thing is to make sure those mistakes don't cost too much." 3 days later, Michael called me. "Victoria, we need to meet immediately." His tone was grim, not a good sign. At the office, Michael looked deeply concerned. He locked the door and pulled a thick folder from the safe. "What I found is extremely troubling," he said, placing the folder on the desk. "Eleonora Brooks, later Higgins, now Carr, worked 5 years ago as a legal assistant at a firm that was indirectly involved in managing matters for one of the companies in your trust fund. She had access to some documents that mentioned the asset structure and your name as beneficiary." He opened the folder and showed me photographs and newspaper clippings. "But that's only the beginning," Michael continued, flipping through the documents. "After being dismissed from the law firm, she married Daniel Higgins, the owner of a hotel chain. The marriage lasted only 2 years before Higgins died. The police suspected poisoning, but no evidence was found. The Higgins family preferred to avoid a scandal." I studied the photo of Eleonora at her husband's funeral. Elegantly dressed, her face the perfect mask of sorrow, but her eyes, there wasn't a trace of grief in them. "This is where it gets interesting," Michael said, turning the page. "Higgins changed his will a month before his death. Eleonora received about $1 million and a small house, far less than she had expected. The bulk of the estate went to Higgins's children from his first marriage. And she was disappointed," I concluded. "Undoubtedly. After Higgins, she was seen in the company of oil magnate Gerald Pierce. Their relationship lasted about a year, and they even got engaged, but Pierce suddenly broke off the engagement and removed her from his will. Interestingly, around that time, he began showing symptoms consistent with slow poisoning by heavy metals. Fortunately, he caught on in time." I felt a chill down my spine. "You think she's trying to poison James?" Michael nodded. "I have reason to believe so. Her pattern is clear. Find a wealthy man, isolate him from his family and friends, gradually poison him, and manipulate him into changing legal documents in her favor." "But how did she find out James would inherit our trust fund?" I asked. "She met him at the Contemporary Art Gallery, or so I thought." I fell silent as realization struck. She was following him. Once she learned about the trust and my name, she found James and staged a chance encounter. "Exactly," Michael confirmed. "And here's her plan. Marry James, secure financial control over your assets, and if necessary, get rid of him, just like she tried with Higgins and Pierce." "But James doesn't even know about the trust fund," I exclaimed. "How could she possibly get access to it?" "She clearly uncovered the terms of the trust," Michael explained. "James becomes the beneficiary upon your death or in case of your incapacitation. I believe her strategy is this. First, isolate you by relocating you to the annex and cutting off your external contacts. Then, she'll likely begin poisoning you too to deteriorate your health. Once you're entirely dependent on them, she could pressure you into appointing James as trustee, and she'll control him." "What should I do, Michael?" He leaned back in his chair. "That depends on how far you're willing to go to protect your son." I didn't hesitate. "As far as I have to." Michael nodded. "Then I have a plan. But first," he looked me in the eye, "isn't it time to tell James the truth about his father's inheritance?" I paused, remembering the promise I had made to Robert. But the situation had changed. James was 35 now, and his life was at risk because of a woman interested in nothing but wealth. "I promised Robert that James would learn the truth when he became a true man," I said slowly. "I'm afraid he's about to learn it the hard way, through pain and disappointment." Michael nodded with understanding. "In that case, here's what I suggest." The next 2 hours we spent carefully planning our course of action. It was risky, but necessary to save James. Instead of confronting Eleonora directly, we would use her own greed against her. That evening, back at home, I called my son. "James, I've thought about your proposal," I said, letting my voice sound tired and resigned. "I agree." "Really?" He sounded surprised. That's great, Mom. Eleonora will be thrilled." "Of course, sweetheart," I sighed for effect. "You know I've always wanted the best for you, and if selling my home helps you get your dream house—" "Mom, you won't regret it," James said with enthusiasm, though I could still hear exhaustion in his voice. "The annex is really cozy. It has everything you'll need and will be close in case you need anything." In case you need anything. Those words struck me like a blade. When did my son become a patronizing caretaker instead of the boy I raised? But I kept my emotions in check. "That's very kind of you, dear. When can I see your new house?" "We can go this weekend. I'll pick you up on Saturday, okay?" We agreed on the time, and I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of resolve and sadness. For the first time in my life, I was playing a game against my own son, but I was doing it to save his life. "I'm sorry, James," I whispered, looking at his photograph. "I hope one day you'll understand why I have to do this." The plan had been set in motion. According to it, Michael had prepared documents for the house, allegedly for sale, but in reality owned by our trust fund. We drew up a lease agreement disguised as a purchase contract, filled with fine print and legal jargon that Eleonora, in her eagerness to secure a luxurious home, would almost certainly not read carefully. In 3 months, when the first payment was due, the truth would come out. On Saturday, James pulled up to my house in a brand new SUV. Bought on credit, another sign of how much he'd changed under Eleonora's influence. She sat in the passenger seat, impeccably dressed as always. When I stepped outside, she barely acknowledged me with a nod. "Mom, are you ready?" James asked, his enthusiasm sounding forced. "Today you'll see our future home." I gave a reserved nod, clutching my worn handbag, inside of which were documents from the trust fund, proof that this dream home already belonged to our family through one of the fund's companies. "I hope it truly suits you," I said as I got into the back seat. Eleonora glanced over her shoulder. "You'll like it too, Victoria. There's a charming annex that should be quite comfortable." Her tone made it clear that comfortable was the most I could hope for. I simply smiled slightly, knowing that soon our roles would be reversed. As we turned onto a quiet, oak-lined street, I took in the familiar landscape. I had visited this neighborhood regularly for meetings with Michael, though James didn't know that. And of course, I knew the house intimately, the elegant 2-story colonial-style building with a fountain in front. It had been part of our assets for 15 years. "There it is!" James exclaimed, stopping the car at the gate. "Isn't it amazing?" "It really is a beautiful home," I agreed, and it was the honest truth. "The realtor should be here any minute," Eleonora said. "He told us we'd be the first potential buyers to view the place since it went on the market." I suppressed a smile. The realtor was Richard, one of Michael's trusted associates, and the house had never been on the market. This was all part of our plan to save James from the predator who intended to poison him for money. A few minutes later, a black sedan pulled up. Richard Gibbs stepped out, a reliable associate of Michael's, playing the role of real estate agent. Our eyes met briefly, and I caught the faintest of nods. "Mr. and Mrs. Carr?" he said, extending a hand to James and Eleonora. "Pleasure to meet you, and you must be—" He turned to me with a politely interested expression. "This is my mother, Victoria," James introduced me. "She'll be living with us, too." "Very nice to meet you," Richard said, shaking my hand with standard courtesy, not betraying our prior connection. "Well then, let me show you the house." The next hour passed like a surreal dream. I watched as Eleonora admired the marble kitchen, the spacious master bedroom, the living room's panoramic windows. Her eyes lit up with every luxurious detail, every symbol of status. James followed her like a man under a spell, his gaze shifting between the house and the joy on his wife's face. I noticed his pallor, the slight tremor in his hands, signs that his health was worsening. "And here," Richard pointed to a door at the end of the hallway, is a separate annex that used to be a guest house. We walked through a small covered passage into the annex, a compact but elegant space with a small kitchen, bedroom, and sitting room. "This will be perfect for you, Victoria," Eleonora said, with fake concern in her voice. "You'll have your own space and still be close to us." I glanced around the room that was supposedly going to be my new home. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. I, the true owner of the entire estate through the trust fund, was meant to act grateful for a roof over my head. "Looks cozy," I said simply. "The price is pretty steep, though," James added as we returned to the main house. "But with Mom's help, we could manage the down payment." Richard nodded with professional understanding. Property in this area is a solid investment. Prices are only going up. As the tour neared its end, I deliberately lingered in the elegant first-floor library, pretending to browse the books. My fingers ran along the spines, many of which I recognized, as I had approved the interior design when we renovated the house 5 years ago. On one of the shelves, I noticed a photo Michael had strategically placed, a picture of Robert and little James, supposedly left by the previous owners as decor. Richard approached quietly, pretending to highlight a feature of the room. "Everything is on track," he murmured, barely audible, as though commenting on the wood paneling. "The documents are ready for signing at the office." "Thank you," I said quietly, pretending to study the bookshelf. "This isn't easy." He gave a barely noticeable nod. "Michael says we need to act quickly. The test results aren't encouraging." I nodded in understanding. The private investigator we had hired had discreetly obtained samples of James's hair, and the toxicology report confirmed our worst fears: elevated levels of heavy metals in his system, a clear sign that Eleonora was already using her preferred method of slow poisoning. After the house tour, Eleonora insisted on having dinner at an expensive restaurant to discuss the details. I agreed, hoping to gather more evidence of her true intentions. The restaurant was exactly as I expected: pretentious, dimly lit, outrageously priced. Eleonora was in her element, casually ordering the most expensive wine as if money had never been an issue. James looked slightly tense as he skimmed the menu. "So," Eleonora began once the waiter had left, "let's discuss how everything will be organized after the move." She pulled a tablet out of her bag and opened an app with a detailed plan. "I've already drafted a layout for the furniture and a rough weekly schedule," she said, turning the screen toward me. "Victoria, I think you'll be comfortable in the annex. There's enough room for your bed, a dresser, and maybe a small sofa." "What about my books?" I asked. "And my paintings?" Eleonora and James exchanged a quick glance. "You see, Mom," James began gently, "the annex isn't that big, and there just won't be room for all your things." "We can pick a few items that are really important to you," Eleonora added with feigned concern, "and maybe the rest could be sold or donated?" I took a slow sip of wine, keeping my calm. Everything was unfolding exactly as Michael had predicted. Eleonora's first step was to strip me of personal belongings that carried emotional value, slowly erasing my identity. "My book collection is something I've been building all my life," I said evenly. "And the paintings, those are works I've created over decades." "But Mom," James lowered his voice, "we're selling your house. Where else do you expect everything to go?" "We could rent a small storage unit," I suggested. Eleonora grimaced with regret. "Storage units in our neighborhood are insanely expensive. It would be such an irrational expense." She scrolled further down her tablet. "I also put together a list of cohabitation rules," she continued in a businesslike tone. "Nothing major, just to make sure everything runs smoothly." I listened carefully as she methodically listed out regulations, each one clearly designed to restrict my freedom and increase my dependence. I would be allowed to use the main kitchen only during certain hours. The pool would be accessible to me only on weekdays before noon. Guests in the annex only with prior notice, and so on. Finally, she added the finishing touch. "And considering your age, Victoria, I thought it might be wise to hire an assistant to come by a few times a week, just to make sure everything is okay. This was the last step in her plan, to install a monitor disguised as a helper. "And who will pay this assistant?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "A small amount from the proceeds of your house sale could be set aside for that," she replied, hesitating slightly. I looked at James, hoping for any reaction, but he only lowered his eyes with guilt. "I see," I said with a slight smile. "Very thoughtful of you." Eleonora, clearly not expecting such compliance, looked pleased. "I'm glad we understand each other," she said, raising her glass, "to our new shared home." After dinner, when Eleonora stepped into a boutique, James and I were left alone. I decided to test how much he had truly changed under her influence. "James, are you sure this is what you really want?" I asked quietly. "Mom, I know this isn't easy for you," he began, "but you understand we don't have another option." "There's always an option," I said softly. "For example, you could choose not to let your wife treat me like a burden." My words clearly struck a nerve. James's face tensed, and I saw something cold flash in his eyes, something I had never seen before. "Look," his voice hardened, "you need to understand that we're doing you a huge favor. At your age and with your financial situation, you don't exactly have other options." I felt my heart tighten. This was no longer the boy I had raised. In front of me stood a stranger, with my son's face, but Eleonora's cold gaze. "So I'm supposed to be grateful," I asked quietly, "that I'm being placed in an annex and handed rules like a child?" "Yes, damn it, you are," he snapped in a low voice, irritation seeping through. "Do you even realize how much this house costs? Eleonora and I have worked for years to be able to afford something like this, and instead of enjoying what we've achieved, we have to worry about where you'll live and how to take care of you." "I never asked you to take care of me," I reminded him. "That was your offer, or rather, Eleonora's." "What else was I supposed to do?" He ran a hand through his hair. "Leave you in that falling apart house? You've barely been getting by since you lost your job." I looked at him carefully. "James, have you even stopped for a moment to think how this makes me feel? How humiliating Eleonora's rules are? How painful it is to see my own son not stand up for me?" He smirked, a cold, unpleasant smirk I had never seen on his face before. "Oh, don't start with the emotional blackmail. Eleonora warned me you'd try to manipulate me, try to make me feel guilty." There it was, clear proof of how deeply Eleonora had brainwashed him, turning him against me. Time was running out. "James," I said, trying to stay calm, "what happened to the little boy who promised to always take care of his mom? Who used to say I was the most important person in his life?" For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, a glimmer of recognition, maybe even guilt. But it quickly vanished. "I grew up, Mom," he said firmly, "and it's time you realize that I have my own family now. Eleonora is my family, and if you can't accept her rules, maybe you should look for other options." It felt like a slap in the face, but I was prepared. The plan had to work, and soon the truth would come out. I just hoped it wouldn't be too late for James's health. "I understand," I said calmly. "Thank you for your honesty." At that moment, Eleonora came out of the boutique, a small shopping bag in her hand. Seeing us, she instantly shifted her expression to one of concern. "Is everything okay?" she asked, scanning my face, then James's. "Everything's fine, darling," he replied, his voice softening immediately. "Mom's just a little anxious about the move." Eleonora slipped her arm through his, casting a condescending glance at me. "Oh, Victoria, there's nothing to worry about. We'll take care of everything." I only nodded, feeling the resolve inside me strengthen. The toxicology reports Michael had arranged showed that arsenic and other heavy metals in James's system were elevated. Not yet critical, but approaching danger. We had a little time left. The day after our dinner, I met with Michael and Richard at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. Michael, our family lawyer for 25 years and manager of the trust, was the only person besides me who knew the full truth about our family's wealth. Richard, his trusted associate and overseer of specific properties, had become a key ally in our operation. "They're absolutely convinced they're buying the house," I said, stirring my tea. "Eleonora's already planning how to control my every move in my annex." Michael shook his head. "Victoria, you can still stop this. Just tell James the truth. Show him the documents." "And what good would that do?" I gave a sad smile. "After all these years of secrecy, he'll just think I deliberately robbed him of his inheritance, forced him to live modestly when we could have had a life of luxury. He won't understand that Robert and I wanted him to grow up without a sense of entitlement, to value work and simple joys." "But now he's going to find out the truth anyway," Richard noted, scanning through documents. "Yes, but under entirely different circumstances," I straightened. "He'll see Eleonora's true face, realize she manipulated him, turned him against me, that she tried to poison him for money. Maybe then he'll understand our motives, mine and Robert's." Michael sighed. "It's a risky game, Victoria. And this isn't just about money anymore. We're talking about James's health." "I know," I nodded. "Dr. Chang, the one who handled the hair sample analysis, said the toxin levels aren't yet life-threatening. We have about a month, maybe 6 weeks before irreversible damage begins. If we act fast, we'll make it." Richard cleared his throat and opened a folder of documents. "In any case, I've prepared all the necessary papers. According to our plan, they'll believe they're buying the house, but in reality, they'll be signing a long-term lease agreement with an option to buy in 5 years." "And the money I'm giving James for the down payment," I began. "They will technically go toward the first rental installment," Michael finished. "From a legal standpoint, everything is absolutely legitimate. They'll sign the contract themselves, and the funds will be transferred directly to the account of the company that owns the house." "But they won't read it carefully," Richard added. "Eleonora is so obsessed with the idea of getting that luxurious house that she'll sign anything without combing through the fine print." I carefully reviewed the documents, noting the key clauses. "And what about the annex?" I asked. "Is it listed as a separate property or part of the main estate?" "It's registered as a separate residential unit," Richard replied. "And if everything goes according to plan, in 3 months, when the first rental payment is due after the deposit, they'll realize they never actually bought the house." "What if they can't make the payment?" I asked. Michael and Richard exchanged a glance. "In that case," Michael explained, "according to the terms of the preliminary purchase agreement with a buyout option, they'll have 30 days to vacate the premises." "But Victoria," he added carefully, "are you sure you want it to come to that point?" I remembered James's cold stare, his words about how I should be grateful for their favor, how he let Eleonora dictate rules that humiliated me. And I remembered his pallor, the tremor in his hands, the apathy, all signs that he was being slowly poisoned. "Absolutely sure," I said firmly. "Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom before they can see the light." We finalized every detail of the plan. Richard drafted a decorative certificate of initial registration of purchase intent. Michael prepared a legally sound but complex contract with a purchase option clause, which included a mandatory financial solvency check after 3 months. In case of income loss or instability, the buyers would be required to provide additional financial guarantees or vacate the property. "What about the bank and the mortgage?" I asked. "Won't they review the documents?" "We've structured the agreement as a direct transaction between seller and buyer," Michael explained. "The plan is based on the idea that you're giving them money for the down payment, and they're supposedly paying the rest directly to the seller, the trust, in installments. Since the bank isn't involved as a lender, the vetting will be minimal." "Are you sure Eleonora won't suspect anything?" I asked. "She seems detail-oriented." Richard smiled. "We know her psychological profile thanks to your investigation. She's overconfident and impatient, especially when it comes to high-status purchases. I'll create a few distractions during signing, urgent phone calls, extra documents at the last minute." In such situations, people rarely read legal jargon, especially when they think everything is going their way. As we were saying goodbye outside the cafe, Michael gently took my hand. "Victoria, you can still stop this at any time." I squeezed his hand gratefully. "Thank you, Michael, but I have to see this through." For James. Moving day arrived on a rainy Saturday morning. I stood by the window of my house, the home where I had raised James, where Robert and I had built our family, where I had spent most of my life. Most of my things were already packed. The most precious books and paintings I had secretly moved to a secure storage location a week earlier, leaving only what could realistically fit in the annex. The sound of an approaching moving truck pulled me out of my thoughts. James and Eleonora had arrived with a team of movers, planning to load my belongings first, then return for their furniture. I stepped onto the porch, pulling my old cardigan tightly around me. Eleonora sprang from the car with a tablet in hand, perfectly dressed, as always, more for a business meeting than a move. "Good morning, Victoria," she called out with exaggerated cheer. "Ready for the big day?" I gave a faint smile, playing the part of the confused older woman. "I think so, though it's not easy, leaving a house where I've lived for so many years." James came over and gave me an awkward one-armed hug. "It'll be all right, Mom. You'll see. You're going to love the new house." I noticed his slouched posture, his dimmed eyes, the small rash beginning to appear on his face, another symptom of poisoning. My heart tightened, but I reminded myself of the mission. Eleonora was already barking orders at the movers, directing which boxes to take first. "This all goes to the annex," she explained, "so mark it separately from the main household goods." The entire process took less than an hour. Once the last box was loaded, I took one final walk through the empty rooms, silently saying goodbye, not to the house itself. I had many others, more spacious and luxurious, but to the life Robert and I had built for James. The drive to the new house passed in silence. Eleonora spoke nonstop about her plans for decorating, while James simply nodded, agreeing to everything she said. What struck me most was how lifeless his expression had become. When we pulled up to the house, which had, in truth, always belonged to me, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. The movers were already unloading my things, carrying the boxes into the annex under Eleonora's direction, who never once asked for my input. It was just another way to assert her control, and I didn't object. The more her true nature came to light, the easier it would be for James to see the truth. By evening, the move was complete. Eleonora opened a bottle of champagne, and we all raised our glasses to the new home. James smiled, wrapping an arm around her waist, but I could see the painful pallor on his face. "Mom, you're a part of this too," he said, "to your new beginning." I raised my glass, knowing full well that it truly was a beginning, just not the kind they imagined. "To new beginnings," I said, "and to the truth, which always comes to light." Eleonora frowned slightly, but quickly forced a smile back onto her face. "Well then, Victoria, let me help you get settled in your new room. It's late, and you must be tired." It was a polite way of sending me off to the annex, and I didn't resist. After all, the plan was already in motion, and time was on my side. Later in the annex, listening to the distant sounds of music and laughter from the main house, I dialed Michael's number. "How did it go?" he asked. "Perfect," I replied quietly. "Phase 1 is complete, but James's condition is deteriorating faster than we expected. We need to accelerate." "Understood," Michael said. "The documents will be ready for signing by tomorrow. Richard will bring them directly to the house." The very next morning after the move, Eleonora knocked on the annex door at exactly 8 a.m. I had just finished my tea while watching the garden, a garden I had personally designed 10 years ago. "Good morning, Victoria." She walked in without being invited, dressed in an expensive designer tracksuit. "I hope you're getting settled in well." "Quite well, thank you," I replied, setting my cup aside. Eleonora walked around the room, surveying my few belongings with a critical eye. Her movements exuded a sense of ownership. She clearly enjoyed asserting control over me, unaware of who truly owned this house and what surprise was waiting for her in the days to come. "I thought we should go over the schedule and some ground rules while James is out on his morning run," she said, sitting delicately on the edge of a chair opposite me. Just to avoid misunderstandings. I nodded, bracing myself for her list of demands, and noting how strange it was to hear about James going for a run. My son had grown visibly weaker lately, but Eleonora seemed insistent on maintaining his routine, ignoring his declining health. As I mentioned before, we'd be happy if you joined us for Sunday dinners, she began in a businesslike tone. On other days, I think it would be more convenient for you to eat here, in the annex. You've got everything you need to cook. She gestured toward the tiny kitchenette, barely large enough to fit a 2-burner stove and the bare minimum of cookware. It had originally been designed by me as part of a short-term guest space, never intended for permanent living. As for the main kitchen in the house, she continued, you may use it between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, when neither James nor I are typically home. That will help us avoid overlap. I see, I replied, keeping my expression neutral. And what about other shared spaces? Eleonora pursed her lips slightly. The living and dining rooms are also available during those same hours. You can use the pool on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 11 to 1. On those days I'm at work and James is usually in meetings. I listened silently as she methodically restricted my access to the house, a house that, in truth, belonged to me. The irony wasn't lost on me, but for James's sake, I continued to play the role of the compliant mother-in-law. When we have guests, Eleonora lowered her voice as if sharing something sensitive. It would be best if you remained in the annex. Of course, we'll invite you for special occasions, birthdays, holidays, but for casual social visits, I'm sure you understand. Of course, I nodded. My presence might make your guests uncomfortable. She looked slightly surprised by my cooperation, but quickly moved on. As for your own visitors, we understand you might want to have someone over from time to time. Just let us know in advance, say a couple of days. And what if I want to invite a man? I asked with a slight smile, curious to see how far her need for control would go. Eleonora nearly choked. A man? Yes, I shrugged. I'm a widow, not a nun, Eleonora. She was clearly caught off guard, not expecting that. Well, at your age, but of course, if you meet someone suitable, just let us know in advance. I nodded, suppressing a smile. These little moments of destabilizing her confidence gave me small satisfaction in this otherwise heavy situation. After Eleonora left, I called Michael to update him on developments. He confirmed the documents were ready and would be presented for signing in the coming days. Then I spent the rest of the day arranging my temporary refuge, doing my best to make it feel like home, for now. That evening, James stopped by, looking even paler than he had in the morning. How are you doing, Mom? He asked, glancing around the annex. Dark circles had formed under his eyes, and beads of sweat glistened at his temples, though the room was cool. All is well, I replied, barely managing to hide my concern. Eleonora already explained all the house rules to me. He winced slightly. Yeah, she mentioned that. She just wants everything to be comfortable for everyone. Of course, I agreed. It's your house, your rules. James looked uneasy, but didn't object to my wording. I noticed his hand trembling slightly as he leaned on the doorframe, yet another sign of heavy metal poisoning. If you need anything, just let me know, he said, turning to leave. Certainly, I promised, knowing full well that he would be the one needing help very soon. Thus began my first few weeks in the new house. I carefully followed all of Eleonora's rules, constructing the image of a submissive, broken woman. Seeing my compliance, Eleonora grew bolder and more arrogant. Within 2 weeks, she was entering the annex without knocking, moving my things, commenting on my choice of clothing and books. Each of her intrusions I documented in a journal. It might come in handy later. James was visibly deteriorating. He was constantly drinking water, complained of headaches, and his skin had taken on an unhealthy pallor. Despite my limited access to the main house, I managed to secretly collect hair and nail samples, which Michael forwarded to an independent lab for testing. It wasn't easy, but maternal instinct made me resourceful. For one, James often visited me in the annex. During these visits, I would discreetly gather hairs from his collar or shoulders. I even gave him a new hairbrush as a gift, in case he wanted to freshen up while at mine. Later, I would collect strands from it. Nail clippings were harder, but a stroke of luck helped. During one visit, James helped me move a heavy dresser, and I noticed he had started nervously biting his nails, a new habit. After he left, I meticulously collected the tiny clippings from the floor. Additionally, Linda, who now visited me regularly, would casually forget her gloves or scarf, giving James a reason to drop by to return them. These innocent ploys ensured I had regular access to fresh biological samples. The results confirmed our fears. The arsenic levels in James's system were gradually rising. At the end of the third week, during the obligatory Sunday dinner, Eleonora announced they were hosting a party the following Saturday. "We've invited a few important clients of James's and a couple of my colleagues," she said, slicing her steak neatly. "There'll be about 20 people." "Sounds lovely," I responded. "What time would be best for me to leave the house?" Eleonora exchanged a quick look with James. "Oh, there's no need to leave. It'd be better if you stayed in the annex. We wouldn't want to tire you with all the small talk." Sensing that the party could offer an opportunity to learn more about Eleonora's plans, I decided to take initiative. As the first month of my stay in the annex drew to a close, I deliberately went to a supermarket in their upscale neighborhood, even though Eleonora had assigned me a list of approved stores far from her social circle. I wandered slowly between the aisles, pretending to compare prices. Suddenly I heard a familiar voice. "Victoria? Victoria, is that you?" I turned and saw Linda, my longtime friend who knew part of my story, but not about the trust fund. "Linda," I embraced her warmly. "It's been so long." "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" she asked, glancing me over. "Did you move?" I nodded. "Yes, I'm living nearby now, with James and his wife." Linda looked surprised. "Really? He never mentioned that you moved in with them." "It was a spontaneous decision," I explained, sticking to the story Michael and I had agreed on. "After I lost my job at the gallery." Linda frowned. "But I thought you had savings." "They went toward the down payment for James and Eleonora's house," I said, doing my best to sound natural. "Now I live in the annex." "The annex?" Linda looked stunned. "You mean like a guest house?" I gave a little shrug. "It's a perfectly comfortable space, Linda, and I'm grateful to have a roof over my head." Linda's expression grew indignant. "Victoria, this is ridiculous after everything you've done for James." At that moment, I noticed an elegantly dressed older woman nearby, pretending to study products on the adjacent shelf, but clearly eavesdropping. I decided to continue the conversation to see if she really was interested in us. "That's life, Linda," I said calmly. "Children grow up and build their own families, and we have to adapt." Linda shook her head. "That's not adapting, Victoria. That's just wrong." The older woman finally approached us. She had an aristocratic face with striking features and sorrowful eyes. "Forgive me for interrupting," she said with a slight British accent, "but I happened to overhear your conversation. Do you know Eleonora Higgins?" I froze, feeling my pulse quicken. "Eleonora Carr," I corrected. "She's my son's wife." The woman looked directly at me. "She used to be Eleonora Higgins. She was married to my brother." I did my best not to show that I already knew this from Michael's dossier. Meeting Daniel Higgins's sister here was unexpected, but it could be useful to our plan. "My name is Margaret Higgins, and I must warn you, protect your son." Linda glanced between us, clearly shocked. "What do you mean?" I asked, feigning alarm and ignorance. Margaret looked around before answering. "My brother was a healthy man before he married her. 2 years later, he was gone. A strange illness, symptoms no doctor could explain. And right after he changed his will, back in favor of his children from his first marriage. He died," I finished for her, trying to maintain my composure. "The police suspected poisoning," Margaret continued, lowering her voice. But there was no evidence. She's clever, your daughter-in-law. Very clever. I felt Linda clutch my hand. Victoria, what is she talking about? I just want you to be careful, Margaret said, handing me a business card. My phone number. Call me if you notice anything strange, especially if your son starts falling ill without a clear cause. Her words aligned exactly with what Michael and I already knew, but hearing the confirmation firsthand was invaluable. I took the card and acted shaken. Thank you, Margaret. I'll be careful. After Margaret left, Linda pulled me into a small cafe near the supermarket. Victoria, what the hell is going on? Who was that woman? And what did she mean? We sat at a back corner table where no one could overhear us. I stirred my tea thoughtfully, weighing how much I could tell Linda. She had been my close friend for over 20 years, but even she didn't know about the trust fund or the plan Michael and I had developed. Linda, I began cautiously, there are things I can't fully explain yet, but Eleonora is not who she claims to be. I already figured that out, Linda exclaimed. That woman practically accused her of murdering her own husband. I took a sip of tea, gathering my thoughts. She might not be far from the truth. I have information about Eleonora, about her past, about her previous relationships with wealthy men. Linda leaned in. Oh my God, Victoria, and you're living under the same roof with her? As a dependent mother-in-law? Exactly. I allowed myself a faint smile. But it's not as simple as it looks. What do you mean? I decided to trust her with at least part of the truth. I'm not as helpless as I seem, and that house, let's just say Eleonora, isn't as firmly in control as she thinks. Linda looked at me with growing comprehension. You have a plan, don't you? You're planning something. I nodded. Yes, but for it to work, I have to keep playing the role. No one can know I'm aware of Eleonora's past. No one can suspect that I'm not just the fragile old woman they moved into the annex to control. But James, Linda said, shaking her head, how could he do this to you, after everything you've done for him? I gave a sad smile, thinking of my son, who was growing paler and weaker every day. Time was running out. Eleonora manipulates him brilliantly, I said in a hushed tone. Not just psychologically, chemically too. The lab results show elevated arsenic levels in his system. She's slowly poisoning him, Linda, just like she did her first husband. Linda's face turned pale. God, Victoria, you have to call the police. And tell them what? I asked. That I suspect my daughter-in-law of poisoning my son. Without hard proof, the police won't act. And Eleonora is smart enough to deny everything, convincingly. James would probably take her side. No, we need irrefutable evidence. So what are you going to do? What I must, I answered firmly. To protect my son. Even if it means revealing the secret Robert and I have kept for decades. Linda reached across the table and gripped my hand. What can I do to help? I thought for a moment. For now, just be my friend. Visit me. Let Eleonora see that I have support, that I'm not alone. That'll make her nervous, maybe even careless. Gladly, Linda nodded with resolve. I could show up unannounced. That should really get under the skin of a control freak like her, right? I couldn't help but smile. You've always understood me without a word. And how did you find out about the poisoning? Do you have proof? I do. Hair and nail analysis from James, I said. I secretly collected the samples and had them sent to a toxicologist via my lawyer. The results are clear. Elevated arsenic levels. Not yet fatal, but if it continues, the damage could become irreversible. As we said goodbye outside the supermarket, Linda hugged me tightly. Be careful, Victoria. If that woman is really as dangerous as Margaret Higgins says. Don't worry, I patted her back reassuringly. I have a plan and allies. Eleonora doesn't realize that the woman she thinks she's manipulating is actually the owner of a trust fund with very powerful connections. On my way home with the groceries, I called Michael to inform him about the encounter with Margaret Higgins. It was a valuable confirmation of the information in our dossier, and the potential for collaboration with Eleonora's first husband's family might become a key piece in our strategy. As I arrived home, I spotted Eleonora at the window, watching me with clear irritation. She had probably seen me at the unauthorized supermarket or with Linda. I gave her a friendly wave, pretending not to notice her displeasure. 2 weeks later, James returned home looking paler than ever. "I've been let go," he announced at dinner. "Company restructuring. Our entire department was laid off." Eleonora's reaction was revealing. Rather than offering support or comfort, she panicked. "How are we going to pay for the house?" she cried. "Our monthly payments are huge." James looked confused by her priorities. "I have some savings, and I'll find a new job." "That won't be enough," she insisted. "We need at least $10,000 a month just for the house." I watched their argument silently, waiting. According to our plan, the first regular payment was due 3 months after the purchase. James's job loss fit perfectly into the timeline, although I genuinely sympathized with him. 3 days later, with all the necessary documentation prepared by Michael, James came to see me in the annex. He looked exhausted and clearly felt embarrassed. "Mom," he began, avoiding my eyes, "I know it's awful to ask, but do you have any savings left? Even a little? Just to help us with the payments on the house until I find a new job?" I slowly shook my head. "James, sweetheart, I have nothing left. I gave all my savings for the down payment on this house, remember?" He nodded, his shoulders sinking even lower. "Yes, of course. Eleonora's panicking. She says we might be evicted." Right on cue, the next morning there was a knock at the door. I knew who it was even before Eleonora opened it. "Good morning," said Richard Gibbs in a formal tone, a far cry from the friendly demeanor of his previous visit. "I represent the Albion Trust. I need to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Carr regarding their preliminary agreement and purchase option conditions." "Option conditions?" Eleonora repeated, her voice rising a full octave. "What are you talking about? We signed a purchase agreement." Richard raised an eyebrow and opened his briefcase, pulling out documents. "I'm afraid, according to the contract you signed, continued progress toward purchase requires confirmation of stable income after 3 months. Otherwise, the clause requiring additional financial guarantees is triggered. As I understand it, Mr. Carr has lost his job, which automatically activates this clause." By this time, James had joined us, his face full of confusion. "There must be some mistake," he insisted. "We signed purchase documents. We have copies." Richard handed over the documents he held. "Here's your copy. Section 17.3, subsection B, which you signed. It clearly outlines the financial guarantee requirement. If you'd like, we can refer the matter to a notary to verify the signatures." In the chaos that followed, I quietly stepped back, watching as the final act of our plan unfolded. Eleonora swung between denial and fury. James looked utterly lost. When Richard finally presented the signed lease agreement, bearing both my signature and Eleonora's, the real storm broke loose. "I never signed this!" Eleonora screamed. "This is some kind of scam!" But her protests grew less convincing with every document Richard methodically presented, each bearing her signature, each clearly stating that the money I provided had been used to pay 6 months of rent in advance, not to buy the house. James turned to her, his face pale with shock and fury. "You knew? You knew this whole time we weren't actually buying the house?" Eleonora began to retreat, her confidence visibly crumbling. I thought it would be better for us. A temporary solution. I was going to tell you once everything settled." "She also forged my signature," I said, stepping forward, "on documents that claimed I had waived my rights to the funds I gave you." A heavy silence fell over the room. James looked back and forth between us as though seeing us for the first time. "But why?" he whispered at last. "Why all of this?" I knew the time had come to reveal the full truth, but chose to do so gradually. Let James first come to grips with the scale of Eleonora's betrayal. "I think that's a question best asked of your wife," I said, staring straight at Eleonora. "Perhaps she'll also tell you about Daniel Higgins." At the mention of that name, Eleonora's face completely changed. For the first time since we met, I saw real, unfeigned fear in her expression. Silence took over the living room, broken only by James's heavy breathing. He stood in the middle of the room, gripping the documents in his hands. His fingers trembled, a result of the poisoning, worsened by stress. "Eleonora, what is going on?" James's voice rose. "It says right here that my mother's money went toward rent, not a purchase. Your signature is on all the documents. And—" He paused, staring at the signature on the final page. "This is my mother's signature? Did you forge it?" Eleonora recoiled, as if struck. Tears welled up in her eyes, so convincingly performed that I almost admired her acting skill. I just wanted us to have a beautiful home," she said, voice trembling. "You deserve the best. We deserve it. It was the only way." "The only way to do what? Deceive my mother? Make her sell the house I grew up in just to pay for rent?" James threw the papers onto the table. "Do you even understand what you've done?" I watched Eleonora's face shift. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her eyes remained cold, calculating. She collapsed onto the couch, putting on a show of sorrow and regret. "I just wanted us to live well, like we always dreamed," she sobbed. "Your salary, we could never afford a house like this otherwise." The scene was familiar. Michael's dossier had detailed similar moments. First the tears and apologies, then blame-shifting, and finally, "You always blame me," Eleonora suddenly shouted, lifting her head. Her tears vanished instantly. "I do everything for you, for us, and your mother, she's always stood between us. You're too attached to her." There it was, aggression, exactly as described in the reports about her behavior with previous husbands. "Don't you dare drag my mother into this," James growled, his fists clenched. At that moment, Richard, who had been observing the scene from the corner of the room, stepped forward. "Forgive the interruption," he said professionally, "but I must clarify the situation. You are currently in arrears on your rent for the past month. According to the contract, you have 3 days to settle the amount, or you will be evicted." 3 days? James shook his head. "That's impossible. I lost my job a month ago. We don't have that kind of money." "I'm very sorry," Richard replied calmly. "But rules are rules. I'll return in 3 days." As the door closed behind him, Eleonora lashed out. "See what you've done?" she screamed, jumping to her feet. "If you hadn't lost your job, everything would have been fine. We'd have made the payments and no one would have found out." "No, you did this." James's voice, usually calm, was suddenly unrecognizably harsh. "You lied to me. You lied to my mother. You forged documents." "For us." Eleonora stepped toward him, but he backed away. "Don't come near me." James shook his head. "I can't. I need to think." He quickly left the room. Eleonora stood in the middle of the living room, her face twisted with rage. When she noticed me, she hurled a cold, venomous glare. "Are you satisfied?" she hissed. "It's all ruined." I met her gaze calmly. "You ruined it yourself, Eleonora, and it's not the first time." I turned and walked out, leaving her alone with her fury. Night had fallen over the house, wrapping it in silence. I sat at the window of the annex, staring up at the stars, when I heard a quiet knock at the door. "Mom?" James's voice was shaky. "Can I come in?" I opened the door. My son looked exhausted, as if he had aged 10 years. Tears welled in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and I embraced him. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had my real son back. We sat on the small couch, and James, almost confessing, told me how Eleonora had slowly poisoned his perception of me. "She said you were manipulating me, using your self-sacrifice to make me feel guilty." James shook his head. "At first I didn't believe her, but she kept repeating it, again and again, and I started seeing things that weren't there." "She's a master manipulator," I said softly, stroking his shoulder. "She kept telling me you'd be a burden to us, that you'd never let me live my own life." He clenched his hands. "And I believed her. I betrayed you, Mom." I gently touched his cheek. "James." Have you noticed anything strange lately? Has she been adding something to your food or drink?" He looked at me, surprised. "Why are you asking?" James fell silent, as though remembering something. "Now that you mention it, I often woke up with a terrible headache after she insisted I drink her special herbal tea at night. She said it helped with stress." I sighed deeply. It was time for the full truth. "James, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've kept from you your entire life." I pulled out a folder from a small safe hidden behind the bookshelf. "This house," I handed him the papers, "and several other properties, they belong to me. I own them through a trust fund your father established before he died." James took the documents, his hands trembling slightly. "What? But how? You worked 3 jobs. We lived so modestly." "Your father wanted you to grow up unaware of the money," I explained. "He was afraid wealth would corrupt you, make you arrogant, take away your drive. Before he died, he made me promise to keep our fortune secret until you became the kind of man he could be proud of." James stood, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "All this time, you lied to me? You made me believe we were poor, that you were sacrificing everything for me." "I really did sacrifice, James," I said quietly. "My comfort, my honesty with you, that was the hardest part. But I saw you grow up to be hardworking, kind, determined. Exactly the way your father wanted you to be." James shook his head, trying to process what he'd heard. "So all these years—" "Wait." He stopped suddenly. "You knew this house belonged to you when Eleonora and I asked you to sell your home and move in here?" I nodded. "I did, and it was a way to test how far Eleonora was willing to go." "Why didn't you just tell me the truth then?" "I wanted you to see her true face," I said, pulling out another folder. "I had serious suspicions, and I couldn't let her hurt you." By morning, we had a plan. James and I waited for Eleonora in the living room. When she walked in, still wearing her mask of injured innocence, confident in her charm, she froze, seeing us sitting together. "What's going on?" she asked, glancing between us. "Sit down, Eleonora," James said calmly. "We need to talk." "If this is about money, I already called my parents," she said quickly. "They'll help with the arrears, and—" "This isn't about money," James interrupted. "Or rather, not just about that." I placed the folder on the table. "This house belongs to me, Eleonora," I said evenly. "As do several other properties in the city. I own them through a trust fund my husband created." Eleonora laughed, but it sounded forced. "What nonsense is this? If you had money, you wouldn't have lived in that dump and worked yourself to death." "All by my father's wishes," James explained. "He wanted me to grow up without privilege." I opened the folder and spread out the documents. "These are the papers for this house. Here's the trust, listing me as the primary beneficiary. And here's something else," I said, pulling out the second folder. "A dossier on you, Eleonora? Or should I say, Mrs. Higgins?" Eleonora froze, her face turning white as chalk. "I know about Daniel Higgins," I said quietly. "And what happened to him, and about your attempts to poison James." "You're not as clever as you think, Eleonora. I know your plan from start to finish. 5 years ago, you were a legal assistant at Anderson and Partners, the firm that handled some of the holdings in our trust. That's where you accidentally came across documents listing me as the beneficiary of a significant estate. And that is what woke up your greed." I took a step forward, not breaking eye contact with her. "You did your research. You learned about the structure of our trust and realized that my son was the sole heir, but had no idea he was wealthy. The perfect target, wasn't he? You began studying his routines, habits, his circle. You accidentally met him at the Modern Art Gallery, knowing his tastes and interests. But that meeting wasn't accidental, was it?" I picked up the folder from the table and opened it. After the failure with Higgins and the suspicions surrounding his poisoning, you couldn't risk another high-profile target. You needed a clean slate, someone with no public status, no bodyguards, no lawyers, or watchful family. James, unaware of his fortune, was the perfect invisible target. Your plan was simple and brutal at the same time. Step 1, charm James and marry him as quickly as possible to gain legal rights over his assets. Step 2, separate him from me, the only person who might uncover your deception. You systematically convinced him that I was manipulating him, using my sacrifice to make him feel guilty. And you succeeded, didn't you? I turned another page in the folder. Step 3, gain physical control over me. Force me to sell my house so the funds could be used for your own purposes, and move me into the annex where you could monitor my every move. Your house rules weren't just whims. They were a method of isolating me, cutting me off from the outside world. And the housekeeper you wanted to hire, in reality, a warden, someone to report on me. James listened with growing horror, his eyes darting between me and Eleonora. But the most terrifying step was number 4. The same method you used with Daniel Higgins? Gradual poisoning. Arsenic in the healing tea you gave James. Small doses to induce symptoms resembling a mysterious illness, fatigue, headaches, nausea. You planned to do the same to me once I was fully in your control. I pulled out the final document from the folder. And finally, step 5, to have me, weakened and disoriented, sign a declaration of incapacity, making James the controller of the trust. And since you controlled him, all our wealth would essentially fall into your hands. Then you'd increase the poison doses, and after our deaths, as James's widow, you would inherit the entire Carr family fortune. I closed the folder and laid it on the table. The same method as with Higgins. But there, you made a mistake. Most of his fortune went to his children from a previous marriage because he changed his will at the last minute. This time, you planned to be more thorough, ensuring you'd have absolute control over every asset before death occurred. I took one last step forward and said quietly, "But you miscalculated one thing, Eleonora. I'm not a helpless widow you can manipulate. I'm a mother protecting her son, and I have evidence for every step of your plan, from private investigator reports to James's toxicology results showing arsenic poisoning." The room fell into utter silence. Then Eleonora's face twisted with rage. "You can't prove anything," she hissed. "Nothing." "We don't need to prove anything in court," James said calmly. "We just want you gone." Eleonora turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "You're choosing her over me? Your mommy?" She spat out the word with disdain. "After everything I've done for you?" "After everything you lied about," James corrected her. "After you tried to poison me, yes, I choose the truth. And I choose my mother." Eleonora straightened, her face a mask of icy fury. "You'll regret this," she growled. "I'll sue. I'll tell everyone how you manipulated me." "No, you won't," I said, sliding one final document onto the table. "Because if you do, the police will receive this. James's toxicology results proving he was systematically poisoned with arsenic. Your fingerprints on the bottle of arsenic compounds found in your makeup bag, and Margaret Higgins's testimony about the death of her brother." Eleonora opened her mouth but said nothing. Her mask had finally shattered, revealing pure, unfiltered hatred. "You have 2 choices now," James said firmly. "Either you leave this house and this country immediately, disappearing from our lives forever, or—" At that moment, the doorbell rang. "Oh yes," I looked at the clock. "Detective Morrison should be right on time." Eleonora's face contorted with shock. "You called the police?" "After learning you tried to poison my son?" "Of course," I replied calmly. "We conducted our own investigation, gathered the evidence, and handed it over to the authorities a week ago. Detective Morrison was simply waiting for our signal to make the arrest." James went to open the door, while Eleonora rushed toward the back exit, but a police officer was already waiting there. Within minutes, she was sitting in handcuffs in the living room as Detective Morrison read her rights. "Eleonora Brooks, also known as Eleonora Higgins, also known as Eleonora Carr, you are under arrest on charges of attempted murder by poisoning, fraud, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent." As they took her away, she turned and cast a look of pure hatred at me. "This isn't over," she hissed. For you, it is, I replied quietly. We contacted the Higgins family. They provided hair samples they had kept all these years. The analysis revealed the same type of poisoning. The case of Daniel Higgins's death has been reopened. Eleonora went pale, and that was the last we saw of her before the police let her out. 3 hours later, the house fell into a silence unfamiliar after the storm. Eleonora was gone, taking only the essentials, without saying a word of goodbye. James and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. I still can't believe it, he said quietly. All this time. I'm sorry I had to hide the truth, I said, taking his hand. But your father was right. Look at the man you've become. The man who betrayed his own mother for a woman who planned to poison him, he said bitterly. The man who found the strength to face his mistake and make it right, I gently replied. Your father would be proud of you. James squeezed my hand. Tell me about him, everything you never told me. I smiled, feeling the weight of years of silence begin to lift. With pleasure, we have all the time in the world now. A week had passed since Eleonora's arrest. The house seemed to breathe easier, but for James, it was just the beginning of a long road to recovery. As soon as the toxicology reports confirmed arsenic poisoning, we consulted a specialist, Dr. Lawrence, who designed an intensive chelation therapy plan for James. The detox process was grueling, daily IV treatments that caused nausea and exhaustion. Arsenic is insidious because it accumulates in body tissues, Dr. Lawrence explained at our first meeting, especially in hair, nails, and nerve cells. Complete elimination can take many months, and some neurological effects may last for years. James endured the treatment with courage, though there were times when his condition worsened. Weakness, occasional hand tremors, numbness in his limbs, these were just some of the symptoms he had to face. The cognitive effects were especially hard. Sometimes he couldn't focus on a conversation or forgot simple things. This will pass, Dr. Lawrence reassured us, but it takes patience. Every Wednesday and Friday, we went to the clinic for treatments. Each month, lab results showed a slow but steady decline in toxin levels. By the 6th month, James managed to walk half a kilometer without shortness of breath. His skin began to regain a healthy color, and moments of mental clarity became more frequent. But Dr. Lawrence warned us that full recovery could take up to 2 years, and some damage, especially to the peripheral nervous system, might be permanent. The key is that you caught it in time, he said during one checkup. Another few months and the consequences could have been irreversible. James and I lived side by side, rediscovering each other as he went through his long, difficult treatment. In some ways, this fight against the illness brought us closer than years of shared life ever had. One evening, as summer rain rustled against the windows, I decided to take another important step. James, I called to my son, who was gazing thoughtfully out the living room window. He looked up at me, still tired, with dark circles under his eyes, but the spark I'd loved in him since childhood had begun to return. Where to? James asked, rising. There's something you need to see. I led him to my bedroom, where for many years I had not only kept my belongings, but also the deepest secrets of our family. I pushed aside a heavy dresser and knelt before a small safe built into the wall. James watched me with curiosity and surprise. I didn't even know we had a safe, he murmured. There's a lot you didn't know, I replied softly, typing in the combination I had memorized all these years. The code is your birth date. The metal door opened with a soft click. Inside were documents, a few old photographs, and a thick envelope. I carefully took it out. On the yellowed paper, in my husband's handwriting, it read, To James, open after Victoria's death. I handed the envelope to my son, my hands trembling slightly. But you? James began, staring at the writing. I'm still alive, I smiled weakly, but I think the circumstances call for breaking that rule. Your father wanted you to read this letter only after my death, but I believe you need to read it now. James accepted the envelope, his fingers brushing the paper with reverence. He slowly opened it and took out a few pages covered in a familiar, even handwriting. "It's Dad's handwriting," he whispered. Tears welled up in his eyes. "I barely remember it." "Read it," I gently urged him. "I'll be right here." We settled into the chairs by the window, and James began to read aloud. "My dear son, if you are reading this letter, it means your mother is no longer with us, but I hope that you've grown into a man I always dreamed you'd become. There is a secret your mother and I chose to keep from you. Our family owns a considerable fortune, properties in several cities, and a trust fund established by my father. All these years, your mother lived modestly not out of poverty, but out of love for you. I'm writing this letter knowing that my days are numbered, and my greatest fear was never for our wealth, but for you, my boy. I've seen how money ruined many in our family. I've seen how easy wealth turns people into hollow shells, stripped of purpose and meaning. Your mother and I talked at length and decided you should grow up knowing the value of work, persistence, and honesty. We wanted you to become a man, not just an heir." James's voice broke. He lowered the letter and looked at me, his eyes full of pain and confusion. "All these years, Mom? You worked 3 jobs, gave up your painting, your personal life, and all this time." "That's what your father wanted," I said softly, and I agreed with him. "We wanted you to learn to value what truly matters, not money." James returned to the letter. Robert wrote about his love, his hopes, and how what matters most in life is not what you have, but who you are. With every line, I saw James's expression shift from hurt and disbelief to understanding and acceptance. "And if your mother chooses to tell you the truth sooner, then she must have had good reason. Trust her, son. She never meant you harm. With love, your father, Robert." James whispered the final words. Silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of rain outside the window. "Why did you decide to tell me now?" he asked at last. "I think we all needed this lesson," I answered, looking out the window. "For me, to realize that hiding the truth isn't always the same as protecting. For you, to see that money and status don't define a person. Sometimes we have to lose our way to find the right path." A month later, I set up an easel in a sunlit room overlooking the garden. For the first time in 25 years, I returned to painting. My fingers, hardened from years of work, at first clumsily held the brush, but muscle memory returned. I painted sunsets, sunrises, a portrait of James, who now often sat with me and shared his plans. A few months into his treatment, once James began to feel better, he made a decision that both surprised and delighted me. "Mom, I want to tell you something," he said one evening. "Do you remember I told you I dreamed of becoming an architect, like Dad?" I nodded. That dream had never been a secret. In school, James spent hours sketching and drafting, just like Robert. Well, I wasn't just interested. I actually earned a bachelor's degree in architectural design alongside my computer science degree. It was a dual major. "You never told me that," I said, surprised. "After Dad died, it hurt too much. And then Eleonora convinced me that IT had more prospects and money." He showed me a folder with certificates and diplomas he had carefully preserved all these years. Recently, I got in touch with Professor Hayden, my academic advisor. He now heads a small architectural studio. I showed him my old designs and told him about my experience in developing software for architectural visualization. It turned out James had spent the last 3 years working on an IT platform for 3D building modeling, used by many architectural firms. It gave him a unique edge. He understood both the technical and creative sides of the profession. "I've been hired as a digital modeling and visualization specialist," James explained. "It's essentially a hybrid role between IT and architecture. I'll need to take evening classes to refresh my knowledge of current building codes and materials. Professor Hayden has offered to mentor me." "It's not going to be quick," he continued. 2 years to regain the necessary qualifications, then I'll start building a real portfolio. But I'm ready. This is what I've always wanted to do." His eyes gleamed with the same spark I remembered in Robert's. In that moment, I knew my son had finally found himself. In the fall, James introduced me to Rebecca, a school teacher. She joined us for dinner with a homemade apple pie and amusing stories about her students. I saw how James's face lit up beside her, how genuine his laughter sounded. This was real affection, not clouded by calculation or material gain. On the anniversary of Robert's death, the three of us visited his grave. James laid white lilies, his father's favorite flowers, and stood in silence. Then he knelt and whispered, "Forgive me, Dad. I understand now." He and Rebecca were married in the spring, in a small church on the edge of town. Instead of a luxurious gift, I gave them the keys to a modest house with a garden. "This isn't from the family trust," I told my son, looking into his eyes. "I bought it with money from the sale of my new paintings." James hugged me tightly, and I knew he understood what that gesture meant: to start a family life with something earned through honest work. A year later, the three of us sat on the porch of our home. Rebecca was 4 months pregnant, and James had just completed a project for affordable housing for young families. The evening sun gilded the treetops, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming apple trees. James raised his glass of lemonade to family and to the lessons we had to learn to truly understand its worth. We clinked our glasses together, and in the sound of the crystal, I felt Robert's silent approval, smiling down on us from above, proud of the man his son had become. If you enjoyed the story, please support it with a like and comment.